The Book of Proverbs is one of the 5 books of wisdom we find in the Old Testament of the Bible, and an ultimate guide to how one should live, pleasing not only God, but also how to act to be a good fellow human being. The book was originally written to gain both knowledge and judgment to the young, but also to make the wise, wiser. The points in the Book of Proverbs are raised to remind the reader on how to live a life that brings rewarding goals, and through acquiring wisdom and knowledge on how to avoid the pitfalls of foolishness, leads to personal well-being, happy family relationships, fruitful work and a meaningful position in the community and society. A proverb is defined as a general truth or advice, but if you look at Hebrew and Greek translations, a proverb can also be something that parallels or resembles something. The Book of Proverbs was probably written and compiled sometime between the 9th and 6th century BC. Solomon, son of David, who is said to be the main author behind the Book of Proverbs, died around the year 960 before Christ. When God asked Solomon about what he wanted in life, he answered that he wished for wisdom and knowledge, so that he could help and lead people in the best way possible. God rewarded Solomon with what he wished for, and was very pleased that Solomon had asked for wisdom and knowledge, instead of things like riches or honor. This message also runs through the entire Book of Proverbs like a common thread. Only a fool despises wisdom and instructions, but he who praises the Lord and follows the word, is on the right path to true knowledge and enlightenment, and will live a rich life in a fruitful, joyful and peaceful way. Several experts believe that to really understand the Book of Proverbs, the reader must absorb and dig deeper to find the true meaning behind the words, especially the first 9 chapters. Within these, focus is mainly on wisdom and pleasing the Lord, but also how to relate to money and escaping sexual impurity. These first chapters lay the foundation and context for the rest of the book. King David's 10th son, and Bathsheba's 2nd son, Solomon, was responsible for writing down the proverbs that have been collected in the Book of Proverbs. Solomon accounts for 29 of the 31 chapters, the remaining 2 chapters were written by Agur and King Lemuel. Solomon is known for his wisdom, and reigned in what many call the Golden Age of Israel, a period that lasted about 40 years. When studying the scriptures in the Book of Proverbs, most points point to Solomon and him performing the divine work of King David. Just before his death, David gave a command to Solomon. "I am about to go in the way of all the earth," he said. "So be strong, act like a man, and do what the Lord your God requires, walk in obedience to him, and keep his ordinances and commandments, his laws and regulations, as it is written in the law of Moses. Do this that you may prosper in everything you do and wherever you go, and that the Lord may keep his promise to me. If your descendants watch how they live, and if they walk faithfully before me with all their heart and soul, they will never fail to have a successor on the throne of Israel." When we look at how the history of Solomon has been, and according to the Book of Proverbs, Solomon did follow King David's command. The structure of the Book of Proverbs is laid out so that certain topics intertwine in different ways for it to be perceived as a new topic, but when you break it down, you notice how several of the chapters help the reader to reflect on their basic behaviors. Some say that the magic of the texts is that each chapter can be perceived as a new chapter, depending on which day you read it and how the messages reach you in different ways, also depending on the emotional state you are in. By reading the Book of Proverbs, we can learn new wisdom about today's society, even though the book was written thousands of years ago. The book also works so that you can learn something new from it, even if you have read it hundreds of times before. The more you read and analyze the different angles, the better you will become at taking in the content. According to many of today's modern Christians, it is especially important that we read and take the Book of Proverbs to our hearts, as our current society is struggling a lot with topics like infidelity, materialism, laziness and self-sufficiency thrives. Reality shows, news of murder and decay, social media promoting happiness as wealth, and efforts to keep God away from humanity, is probably one of the biggest downfalls for humanity as we speak. Even if you don't share the Christian faith, it can be both good and useful to read the Book of Proverbs to take part of the deeper knowledge found in these old texts, which will at least give you food for thought.